Thank you very much. I feel actually a bit old, actually, but I'll try and forget about that. I've got about 20 minutes, is that right? So I thought I might start straight away. I had to kind of just check what empathy meant. So it basically boils down to seeing the world or the problem or whatever it happens to be through the other person's eyes, not your own. So that made me think, aha, I know how we'll start the talk. So this is why I feel a bit old, because I remember these when they first came out, but you'll probably study them in school, but here we go. Do I just press the button to start?
Gentlemen, we have two basic suggestions for the design of this architectural block, the residential block. And I thought it best that the architects themselves came in to explain the advantages of both designs. That must be the first architect now. Ah, yes, it's Mr. Wiggin of Ironside and Malone.
Morning, gentlemen. This is a 12-story block combining classical neo-Georgian features with all the advantages of modern design. The tenants arrive in the entrance hall here, are carried along the corridor on a conveyor belt in extreme comfort and past murals depicting Mediterranean scenes towards the rotating knives. The last 20 feet of the corridor are heavily soundproof. The blood pours down these chutes, and the animal's flesh slurps into these large
Excuse me. Did you say knives?
Rotating knives, yes.
Are you proposing to slaughter our tenants?
Does that not fit in with your plans?
No, we wanted a simple block of flats.
Ah, I see. I hadn't correctly divined your attitude towards your tenants. You see, I mainly design slaughterhouses. Yes, pity. Mind you, this is a real beaut. I mean, none of your blood caked on the walls and flesh flying out of the windows, inconveniencing passers-by with this one. I mean, my life has been building up to this.
Yes, and well done. But we did want a block of flats.
Well, may I ask you to reconsider? I mean, you wouldn't regret it. Think of the tourist trade.
No, it's just that we wanted a block of flats and not an abattoir.
Yes, well, of course, that's just the sort of blinkered, Philistine, pig ignorance I've come to expect from you. Creative garbage. You sit there on your loathsome spotty behind, squeezing blackheads, not caring a tinker's cuss about the struggling artist. You excrement! You lousy, hypocritical, whining toadies! With your lousy colour TV sets and your Tony Jacklin golf clubs and your bleeding Masonic handshakes! You wouldn't let me join with you, you black-balling bastards! Well, I wouldn't become a Freemason now if you went down on your lousy, stinking, polluted knees and begged me!
Well, we're sorry you feel like that, but we did want a block of flats. Nice though the abattoir is.
Oh, the abattoir, that's not important. But if one of you could put in a word for me, I'd love to be a Freemason. Freemasonry opens doors. I mean, I was a bit on edge just now, but if I was a Mason, I'd just sit at the back, not get in anyone's way.
Thank you.
I've got a second-hand apron.
Thank you.
I nearly got in at Hendon.
Thank you.
Well, not the most successful job interview, but I thought I'd show that because lots of people think that architects are sort of artistes and have their own agenda, which of course we do, like everybody in the room, but that they never listen to the client and they just go ahead and build what they want to build. And but actually, what I really wanted to talk about was, in a funny sort of way, luckily we don't listen to the client, or we do listen to the client, and then we add a lot more to it. And I was asked specifically today to talk about the Maggie Centre, which I designed, the first of which there's now many around, not just the country, but the world. And they're a sort of commentary, if you like, on something that's gone horribly wrong, I suspect, with our health building programme. And I just thought I'd show you a few buildings which I wouldn't say the word empathy comes to mind when you see where you might end up. Aberdeen. Here we are. Have we been there? How to make an absolute disaster in sort of 15 years. A great greenfield site could have been absolutely wonderful. It's a total catastrophe. I'll probably get sued now. I'm on the YouTube, but never mind. I find every time I go there, my heart sinks as a place where you deal with the human spirit. And the other one in Edinburgh is just as bad. I can't even decide whether the new buildings are worse than the old ones. So something has gone drastically wrong, and I have to say, straying into territory I don't know much about. Of course, we're all paying for it on the sort of national credit card as well, which is the other side of the coin. Whenever I go to anywhere in a health world, I take a picture of this, which is rather similar to this, which is rather similar to this. That is the experience that people have when they go into a hospital or even a GP surgery usually. And of course the client, you know, as we all know, the client gives you a list of rooms or activities or something like that. But they never think about, it seems to me, the other issue, which is how you find your way around, how you get a geography of building, how you feel comfortable in the place that you're in, how you deal with, and in other words, you're having, the architect and others are having to put themselves in the mind of the patient, who of course is never actually on the client committee. And in a way, the Maggie Centre is about patients, most of all. Perhaps we shouldn't need, in fact we shouldn't need Maggie Centres. I'm sure they don't have them in sort of places like Finland or whatnot, where they have humane hospital design. But where we have now sort of factories for processing people, and this was the experience of Maggie Keswick-Gents about 20 years ago when she was diagnosed with cancer. She was just told to sit on she was told she'd got cancer and told to sit on a plastic chair in a corridor and someone would come and talk to her. You know, I mean, it was that sort of degree of processing, of sort of meat factory processing. So she had a brilliant idea of trying to start a place, and we were given a stable building at the Western General Hospital. And her brief was wonderfully woolly. It's a non-clinical building. It's a place where people are looked after, if you like, their spiritual side, their, well, that's the wrong word, their personal issues to do with having cancer. And so the first thing is, of course, cancer affects everybody. It doesn't matter what social classes. So you have to tempt people across the front door, and you have to instantly welcome them into what is essentially a non-institutional building. And we were sort of struggling around to try and find how this might be. And of course, the idea of someone's house comes to mind. So it's a sense of house and furniture where doors are always open, where you can see what's going on. And crucially, there is no circulation space. In my dedicated circulation space, my book, What Makes an Institution, whatever it is corridors. So there are no corridors. So everything is available and open when you walk in. But like in the top right-hand corner, you can see there are little places you can sit, you can be on your own, you can be on the edge of a larger group. So I'm trying to get myself, if you like, into the mind of a patient who has had the devastating experience of being diagnosed with cancer. The doctor said, oh, you should go and see the Maggie Centre, and they sort of walk in and wonder, and somebody says, hello, do you want to have a seat over here on your own? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? So you're trying to make things feel comfortable, and when something is going on in the room, then we have sliding folding doors, and we know that people are lazy when they open the door, they leave it open. So the idea is, again, that it's not a room full of closed doors. And what we think about is, I mean, the problem with so much of architectural discourse is about the image these days. It's all image driven, and of course the internet feeds this par excellence. And I get very sad about that, actually, because of course what a building looks like is important, but far more important is how it works. And so the hidden elevation, of course, is the plan. And so we think about things like, if you're going into a building you've not been into before, the instant thing is knowing your way around, having the geography and knowing where the destinations are. So that's, if you like, what the Maggie Centre is. We extended it about 5 years later and doubled its size, and we're just about to extend it again. And I said to them, no more, because if we're not careful, we'll end up doing a mini Little France. You know, it'll just grow arms and legs. So that it extended in two directions at the same time, but we kept the central space as the central hub, and then we added new rooms and whatnot. And the problem with the Maggie Centre, problem in inverted commas, is it's suffering on its own success. I mean, it is mobbed, and it obviously is tapping into a serious need. And of course, it's not really just cancer, it's anything that has a devastating effect on you. We need in our hospital system some way of dealing with the human side, and that shouldn't, in a way, it shouldn't be divorced from the clinical side, but now it is. So these are little sort of gatehouses of humanity at the sort of meat factories of our hospitals. So they're funded entirely independently, as you probably know, both the construction and the running, and there's a lot of volunteers there. And for me, it's It's almost like being back in the 1940s again, actually, where you actually feel you're making a difference to people's lives. So we've carried, my philosophy as an architect is I want to do everything. I do not want to specialise. Of course, that doesn't help with the kind of procurement system we have at the moment. So I'm just going to show you where that little building has led, but it's the same ideas. We did a group surgery in Liberton, which was about getting rid of the corridor so that everybody walks in, everyone sits there, the doctor comes and gets you, so there's no sort of corridor-ators about it. Sorry, that's my staff posing as patients. But it's again, you walk in, and there are a lot more destinations, of course, more doctors, all the red dots, but you can see instantly where you're going to go. And it's that sense of reducing people's anxiety, because people are anxious when they're ill. I don't know what the doctor's going to say and all this kind of stuff. So it's important that there's that sense of not having to sort of wander around, follow, I mean, you know what it's like in following coloured lines, getting lost and all this kind of stuff. So that's a building around a courtyard as a GP surgery. And then we found ourselves getting involved in mental health. You know, you just sort of wander around, you end up doing all sorts of things you know nothing about, you know. In fact, I find that we do our best buildings where we know nothing about it. Seriously, I mean, because you can come at it with a fresh mind. And in Belfast, we ended up doing this community mental health centre called Olsey House, where there are a lot more destinations again, and of course, it's basically like a lot of little GP surgeries, except they're psychiatrists, or on the top of the plan, on the bottom of the plan, is therapy, day therapy or half-day therapy. And on the left-hand side of the plan is a sort of separate building, which is like a little house. And it's designed to be like a little house because it's a respite. So if you have a mental breakdown, normally you would have ended up in a large mental hospital somewhere in Belfast. Now you can go there for up to a couple of weeks to live in a house. And if you want to go and see your psychiatrist, you go out the front door and into the other building's front door. And the corridor between the two is just for the staff. Sorry, corridor for the staff. Between the two bits. But the point being is, with, what are we talking about? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 20, 20, 24 destinations. The easiest thing in the world is to make a corridor with 12 doors on either side. You know. But instead, the plan makes a wiggly-waggly line deliberately so that as people come in, they instantly orientate themselves around a garden. Now, it may not come as a surprise to a lot of people, but people like gardens. People spend hours of their life gardening, you know, and if they can come in, they can see that a garden is the centre of a centre for mental health. People instantly calm down, and they instantly have a sense of where they are. They can find their place to wait. They can go and see where they are. I mean, the geography is instant. Now, nobody tells you anything about that in a brief, but you're trying to get yourself into the mind of the patient. And that's what empathy means to me, trying to get yourself into the mindset of the person using the building, not necessarily the person commissioning the building. That's my colleague in Belfast pretending to be a patient. More of them. Because you're not allowed to photograph patients, obviously, so we have to populate them. Anyhow, so, and then a little room, which, you know, Northern Ireland, of course, a bit sensitive. They said, you know, what we don't want is something that looks like a police interview room, you know. So if I can go backwards, you can just see, just here, the room actually has a sort of fixed piece of furniture. So you recognise the piece of furniture on the outside, and then when you go in, you sit on it. It is the place that you sit. So you have a sort of sense of anticipation. So again, we're trying to get into the psychology of people who are mentally disturbed in some way, to help them unwind and go to the next threshold, which is going into that little room. So that's that little project in Belfast, which I'm happy to say just got an award, actually. And then dementia care. I mean, I was horrified. We got a job with Fife NHS somehow. I don't know how we got it, actually, because we didn't tick any of the boxes. And that's what procurement is all about these days, box ticking. But anyhow, actually, we had a guy on the inside, so that probably helped. I looked at the plans of old people's homes and dementia homes, and I've also seen it from the other side of when my late mother went into a home in Hampshire. I was absolutely horrified. I don't know if anyone's been. They are granny farms of the most hideous design, of internal corridors, miserable rooms, 4 walls, a window, a door. That's it, you know. And in this instance, this was likely to be, well, it would be a place where you concluded your life. So I was desperate to try and do something different. I knew nothing about dementia, but I tried to put myself in the minds of a patient, very difficult of course. Some people in my office said it would be quite easy for me, but anyhow, and the staff. And so again, the first thing is about orientation. So once again, we said, get rid of the double-loaded artificially lit corridor, which is what they're all about, and wrap people around a courtyard. We try to do it as much as possible, didn't quite get absolutely everything because of cost, but most people walk out of their door and come and see a garden. And so there's the garden that they walk out into. And then, what can you do with a room? What can you do with a room? So we tried to make every room feel like a little house. Dementia patients respond to sunlight, so if with the monopitch roof there's a roof light, so that wherever you happen to be looking, whichever way the room faces, you get light from both sides, so you will get the effect of sunlight. And then to make a window, which is more than a window, it's a place to be on the corner where you can sit, or your relatives can sit, or they can have a snooze or something like that. So it's more than the idea of 4 white walls in a room. And then you also get the sense of a view to the outside, which is absolutely essential. I mean, the outside world, not just your garden. So we took that idea and we took it again into an ordinary hospital in St Andrews, where we had a hell of a lot of destinations. And we almost won this job. It was a PFI job, and now there's a bunch of tin sheds there with lots of corridors. And that was a shame, because that was our one opportunity to actually move into mainstream hospital design, all based again on the idea of making people feel comfortable about where they are in the building, orientating them around gardens, and understanding their anxieties, and also obviously having to listen very carefully to the staff and all the clinical requirements they need and adjacencies and what have you. And then I think finally, because I only got 20 minutes, we won. Northern Ireland's an interesting place because they had one guy who's now retired, sadly, who was in charge of procurement, and he's tried to keep all the nonsense out of Northern Ireland, of PFI and all this kind of stuff. He's fought a rearguard action. He believes in architectural competitions. He believes in having people on the competition who don't know anything about the job. So that's how we got on. Knew nothing about a mental hospital. And this is an 80-bed acute mental hospital in Belfast. I mean, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, would I be designing a mental hospital, I'd probably say no, more like to be in one. But so we thought, could you do this? You know, could you keep the idea going for 80 single rooms in 5 different wards? And I'm like, as you probably gathered by now, I like courtyards, I like gardens, I like this sense of outdoor rooms. So, and I love places like Grey Walls and whatnot, where you have sort of interconnecting gardens. So our competition design was all about making a series of gardens with hospital attached, basically. So it's, again, it's about the plan. It's not about what it looks like, it's about the plan. So you come in and you come through like a gatehouse, and the yellow stuff is the staff accommodation, and then you walk outside again and you go into a circular cloistered courtyard, which is almost like going back in time 400 years to what a hospital used to be like, which was a monastery, of course, with a cloister. And then off that cloister you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a service wing, 5 wards, but each of those wards is again single aspect corridor looking into a garden, where people come out of their room, look into a garden, and then they have all their other stuff here, and then this is the service wing that deals with both of them for the staff. So I have, don't laugh, I have been to quite a lot of mental hospitals in the last few years. And the tragedy is actually the saddest ones are the most recently constructed ones. And they are all done, obviously, to a budget, but they're all done to a dogma as well, which is about the nurse sits in the centre, there's a hot cross bun of circulation, the rooms are around that circulation so that she can see everything, or he can see everything going on. The people look into tiny little sort of miserable postage stamp gardens, and then that cross gets added to another cross, and then you give people a ball of wool when they enter the whole hospital. You enter and you're in this horrible internal environment, and literally you go all over the place. I went to one in Birmingham where I was freaking out because I hadn't a clue where I was internally, no sense of orientation whatsoever. So this is a project which is completely turning that inside out, and that's about to go on site. So I'm trying to constantly, I mean, the client is really on our side because they understand, I think, that we're trying to see the thing through the patient's eyes, who are never represented, of course, on any of the committees you deal with. So there's the cloister which you will enter, and you have fresh air before you go into the individual wards. Each room is a room. It's a roofed room, a little house, because sometimes you could spend some time there. And the gardens, some rather well-looking mental patients. And finally, we're back in dementia again. And again, it's quite interesting. In dementia, you have huge private companies, or old people's homes, actually. There's not a great difference between the two, to be blunt. You have huge private companies who are really in it for the money. And it's really quite scary, actually. And they all produce the most fantastic websites, and it's all very sort of charming, and they make up marvellous names where people feel comfortable and whatnot, but it's all about money. And then you have local authorities where it's all about sort of rules and how you did it last time. And neither of these huge groups of people are in any way innovative, because big companies... So you're looking for a little pumpkin. We found one. It's the Methodist Church in Northern Ireland. I've never done a dementia home before. You know, great. So we sort of lashed together as new people, and they're doing wonderful things. I mean, they started off with saying we're going to have 64 patients, and we're going to have 8 patients per... We're going to make a little house of patients. So there you've got we've got 8 rooms, which every time you walk out of your room, you walk into a house, basically, a social space, which is obviously a kitchen, dining room, and a living room, and that looks out onto a garden. So that is the place you live, with its own sort of front door. Like there's the social space looking out, and then, sorry, that's a little doodly sketch of that. And then they're paired up, because some things need to be shared, like a assisted bathroom and things like that. And then those pairs are turned into 4 sets of pairs, and they all focus on the central building. And so that is like nothing like any dementia or old people's home plan you will ever find, I think. I'm willing to stick my neck out and say that. And it's all about trying to think of, I mean, to be honest, I'm 60, you know, I'm thinking, 20 years' time, 15 years' time, that could be me. And what do I want, you know? And the idea of living out your life off a corridor, I find the most depressing prospect you can possibly think of. Living in an institution. How do you try and make these places as anti-institutional as possible? And so I was really happy when you asked me to talk, because that's exactly what I'm always trying to do, trying to get away from the brief that the client gives you, obviously be very cognizant of it, but add your view, which your view is, if you like, your view of what the patient is thinking, not what the doctor or the nurse is thinking. It's very important you listen to them too, but it's extraordinary how often that other point of view is missing in commissioning a building. So I hope that was that my 20 minutes? I think so. So that may be of interest. It's only a small area of what we do, and you could have taken that sort of theme, and I could have talked about arts buildings, where I happen to think the most important thing is getting people across the threshold and making it a social space. Or I could have talked about offices and how they might be made sociable. I mean, there was a wonderful book came out in the 60s, I think, called Tools for Conviviality, which is about trying to make plan systems, educational buildings. How do you deal with informal meeting of people rather than just lecture theatres and things like that? And that's all the things that the architect can sort of do without being asked to do, you know, but some architects don't. The other thing I think to add, just to finish, is that you're all creative people. I mean, it's incredible the number of people who just think that all architects are the same, you know. I mean, do you have this? You know, all graphic designers are the same. It's amazing. I suppose I tend to think that all dentists are the same. You know, but maybe they're not. I don't know. But I mean, it's astonishing the lack of sort of effort people put into actually finding an architect or choosing an architect. They just assume they're all the same. Like you look one up in the Yellow Pages, it's almost incredible. So I mean, I sympathise with everybody who has that sort of procurement problem. And if you concentrate on one section, then you've got a good chance of getting a job. But we don't want to do that, because we're interested in people. That's the section we're interested in. You know, if I want to do a library, these days I have to do 5 libraries before I get on the shortlist. You know, and that's a disaster. So it is very hard out there to try and get these opportunities to put these ideas into practice. Anyway, I've probably gone on a bit too long there. So thanks very much. I'm not a mason either, by the way.
Before we take any questions and like gather your thoughts. That was amazing because we've all kind of been victims of bad buildings. I suppose, how did you start bringing in the people? You're saying that's always the view that's missing. What techniques did you use?
There isn't a technique. It's not like you do consumer surveys and things like that. You just use your own mind, really. I think, to be honest, it's probably a generation I was brought up in, because we had to kind of rediscover architecture. When I was a student in the 70s, architecture was suddenly under attack. You know, up to then we'd been sort of minor branch of the superhero family. You know, we were out there building a whole brave new world until everything sort of started going wrong in the late 60s. And then, of course, in the 70s, we were basically, certainly in a place like Edinburgh, you're basically just another branch of the criminal classes. You know, if you go to a party and you say you're an architect, you know, people start getting very rude about you very quickly. You know, and all the sort of Prince Charles nonsense goes on. So I suppose in the 70s, students, when I was a student, we were thinking quite hard about, you know, what's gone wrong. And I think sort of arrogance was, you know, some of the decisions that were made were extremely arrogant, basically, particularly to do with city planning. But to do with just this is how you're going to live, you know. And so I suppose I've always come at architecture from the point of view of that it's all about people, you know. I mean, I suppose if I got a sort of nuclear power station to design, I'd be a bit stuck because there's not many people in that. But most jobs, or a zoo or something, but I mean, most jobs have got people doing things in them somehow. So that's where I always start. I mean, we're just starting this very, very high-profile kind of project on Carlton Hill for a music school, which is a sort of alternative project to the hotel that's being proposed there. You know, and the first thing we have to do is basically have a fly-on-the-wall day at St Mary's School to find out what it is they do and how they do it and how they might do it better and what the essence of that whole. That's how I approach it. I don't start sort of sketching away and saying, well, I think it would look like this, and then you try and stuff people into the great creation that you've created. So I think it comes from that sort of 70s re-examination, and that possibly has been lost today. If you go into a school of architecture, you don't find much talk about how buildings work. It's all to do with abstract concepts again. So, you know, the pendulum swings like it does.
The one opposite the Macintosh. In Glasgow. Sorry,
well, you want me to talk about that?
No. The students there, there's some qualms. But anyways, does anyone have any questions? Richard. Up there? Sorry.
Hi, Richard. I work for a small care home provider. So
oh, great.
I was really interested to hear about your design. So now that you've done some dimension design, I just want to, I've been in far too many corridors in the last few years, and it's quite depressing. Do you feel hopeful that it's changing?
No.
No.
It's getting worse. It's getting worse because two reasons. First of all, it's very difficult to actually get in as an architect into something that you're not sort of been spending the whole of your life designing, first of all. And secondly, even if you did get in, other people start calling the shots in the building. I mean, these days it's the builder who employs the architect, with all the sort of consequences that has. And so you end up losing control of the building to greater or lesser extent. And I find all that kind of side of things quite depressing. I also think, I mean, to make a sort of more general point, I did a bit of reading once when I did some teaching at the University of Virginia, and I read about Thomas Jefferson, actually, and he was a rather interesting guy. And he sort of had a major role in the American Constitution. And he observed something which was very interesting, and I've always thought this is true, is that individuals make things happen, and committees tend to either stop them or sort of moderate them. But they very rarely initiate, a committee very rarely initiates anything or makes something happen. You always need an individual. And I must say, I have, in almost 25 years of practice, have really understood that. It doesn't matter what. We did an embassy for the Foreign Office, and there was one guy in the Foreign Office who was the main man in choosing the architect and making something happen, you know, and it was him. And the one in Fife, there was one guy in Fife NHS who made it his business to get the right architect and all this kind of stuff. But if you don't have that guy, if it's a vice chancellor university or an estates officer or someone who really understands what you're trying to do, forget it, you know, because you just can't do it for a committee. They just won't back you up if you're trying to do something that isn't like the one they did last time, you know. And of course, most of the organisations that you're talking about are not. They don't have that one person, you know, they are just sort of faceless committees, so it's hard work, actually. Sorry to sound very pessimistic, but I mean, might as well be honest, you know.
So I'm from Scandinavia, which
Oh,
has
paradise.
more or less. I would say the hospitals there's still challenges with hospitals there, but one thing that Scandinavia does very well is airports.
Yeah. Don't get me started on airports.
So the Edinburgh airport experience is
Oh.
so bad compared to.
I couldn't agree more. You've really hit a raw nerve here. No, I mean we've replaced. No, I mean I don't know how we've replaced public monopolies with untrammeled, unregulated private monopolies. I am famous on Facebook with my chums, actually. Every time I go through the chaos of the security queue at Edinburgh Airport, I write a letter on my phone and send it off. And I got rid of the guy. It was perfect. I got rid of the guy who runs it. You see, he had to resign. But it wasn't me, of course. But I mean, everyone my chum said. And I just can't. I mean, the other day I flew to Italy from Manchester, which is an airport I know because I used to meet my dad there when I was a little boy, because I'm from Manchester. He used to fly to Dusseldorf every week. And actually, Manchester, I remember Manchester's Ringway, it was a pile of sheds actually, and then they built this fantastic new terminal, and it was dead glamorous. It had dripping chandeliers, it had sort of rubber flooring, it had sort of really impressive people walking around, very expensive restaurant, you know, and it was really glamorous, okay. Now, obviously that was in the days when flying was expensive, and now it's not flying. But I went to Manchester Airport, I hadn't been there for like, I don't know, 40 years or something, and I was absolutely horrified. I mean, it makes Edinburgh look like, you know, Oslo. I mean, and it was just absolutely hideous. And of course, it's all about extracting money out of people. That's what it's about. The reason you queue at security is because they don't bother to spend money on staff and machines, and then they add insult to injury by suggesting you buy a priority lane. It's like the burglar offering to sell you back his goods, you know. And then they just absolutely cram the place full of shops so you can't see out. Has anyone been to Stansted recently? It's absolutely horrific. I mean, Stansted, of all airports, when Foster had this idea of seeing out into the landscape, you can't see out now. You eventually, having gone through this wiggly-waggly shopping experience, you then go into kind of a corral of shops, right, which they actually call, I mean, there's a sense of irony here, they call it the escape lounge. I mean, if only you could friggin' escape from the escape lounge. I mean, talk about the total trashing of an idea. Stansted's a disaster. Edinburgh Airport, I despair. I mean, apparently there is a master plan. I mean, really? Really? Does anyone think there's a master plan? It's the usual bolt on this and do that and do the other. And of course, they're making record profits. And I just think as an introduction to Edinburgh or to Scotland, it's, you know, it's an absolute and utter tragedy. And to be honest, I'm, you know, straying into political areas here, but I genuinely think either you renationalise them or you just give them such serious conditions, like, you know, everyone is entitled to 5 square metres of space, you know, or if you have to queue longer than 2 minutes in the security, you get £10 back, you know. I mean, you really make it onerous that they have to sign up to conditions, because at the moment it's just a blank cheque to screw money out of people. I got talking, sorry, you've really hit a raw nerve here. We're not talking about empathy here, but in fact I'm very unempathetic when it comes to the Edinburgh Airport. I got a plane delayed once, and somebody came around with a clipboard and they started asking me all these questions. So I said, yes, yes. And then she made the fatal error of saying, have you got anything else to say? I said, sit down, dear, sit down. And I just gave her it. And then we had a really nice chat. She was very nice. And she told me something that's very interesting. I had never cottoned onto this. You know, when you go into Edinburgh Airport, or any airport, they say gate advised at such and such a time. So you can't go to your gate. So you end up sort of inevitably going to have a cup of coffee or something. You're constantly looking at the thing to check, because they only usually about 20 minutes usually between telling you the gate and buggering off, you know. And they know which gate the friggin' plane is coming to, you know. I mean, they know it hours in advance, but they don't tell you because they want you to go shopping. Otherwise you'd go through and you just go and sit at the gate and read your Guardian or something. But you wouldn't buy a coffee or anything, you know. I mean, It's all about screwing the passenger for as much money as possible. And I think that's an absolute, you know, crime, frankly. Somebody should be doing something about it. Sorry, it got me a raw nerve there. I'd love to design an airport, by the way. But I mean, not in this country. I mean, that's the other thing, by the way. I mean, Richard Rogers wrote a really interesting article about designing Terminal 5 and designing Madrid. And Madrid, which is a wonderful airport, by the way, it's the best airport in the world, in my opinion, just got built. I mean, they were in like 10 years of planning inquiry at Terminal 5. And then when he did get it, he had a chain of command of about 36 different interest groups if he wanted to move a radiator. You know, it was kind of like nightmare. Why can't we build things? Why can't we get a sensible client system and then just build really good buildings? Why do we have to set up all these ridiculous systems that we have in this country? Sorry.
Thank you. So is the question from this side of the room? No, we get any more questions, Richard? Sorry.
So I'm a copywriter and I see it's also a different industry, but I see similar things that you're saying, that it appears to be tick lists now. No one actually thinks about the function of what they're trying to achieve. Do you think that architects and copywriters have to take their share of blame, because
yes,
there are so many that will just they don't argue back.
No.
I'm not suggesting they start fights with clients, but we're there to advise. You don't have a plumber come around your house, or well, you might because you know stuff, but I don't have a plumber come around and tell them where to put the pipes, or you can suggest things, but then you defer to his knowledge because he spent time learning that. It's quite, I find it nuts that people who don't appear to have the ability to think beyond what they're told by the person up the food chain are making decisions that are billions sometimes of pounds, especially with the PFI nonsense that you guys have to put up with. Do you think that there's a fair chunk of blame to be aimed at ourselves? I don't mean you, but the industries that we work in could be doing more as an industry to try and lead the change? Because a lot of money from architecture seems to go out to the PFI people rather than actually benefiting the people who use the building.
Yeah.
I think, if that makes sense as a question rather than just a rant.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'd say two things. First of all, everyone can be an architect. It's dead easy, isn't it? You just draw a plan.
Absolutely.
You know, anyone can do it. You know, doesn't matter. You know, I mean, it's incredible the number of people who appoint us, and well, not incredible. They're actually, most of the time we have really good clients, but occasionally one pops up who just you just think, what am I doing here? You know, in fact, we've fired a few clients actually because they're just wasting our time really. But it's quite difficult when you've got people to employ to fire someone. I think. What was the other thing? The PFI thing. Well, I think the other problem with being, dare I say it, a creative person, is it's not actually genuinely about being a genius. You know, I'm not a genius, and I think I was taught by a wonderful professor, Izzy Metzstein, who said one thing. He says, if you can teach students, which I don't do anymore because I don't think they teach architecture at Edinburgh anymore, but anyway, if you can teach students to be self-critical, that's game on. You know, it's not, you teach them to question, say it's not good enough yet, you know. And of course the biggest problem, I think that, dare I say it, good architects they defy the laws of Adam Smith. And, you know, if you're really good at something, you're supposed to make lots of money, you know. Actually, it's the other way around. If you find yourself doing really interesting buildings, you go bust. I mean, Malcolm Fraser's just gone bust, you know, and I understand why. Or, you know, there by the grace of God goes me. It's very hard work because you inevitably end up spending more time on something because you're not satisfied with it yourself. It's not that you have amazing ideas before breakfast. And yeah, other architects either can't or won't, basically. But the other problem, I remember again being given some advice when I was quite young, and they said, don't try and do architecture for clients who aren't interested. Now, that's quite hard advice, but I know what they mean. I mean, we keep trying, of course you do, because it's quite often not about the client. I mean, for example, housing associations, I've done a lot of housing, and the bigger the housing association, the worse they are, effectively, and I do feel quite passionately that they are basically becoming the thing they were set up to not be, which is the old corporation housing corporations, paternalistic, out of touch, rule book thinking about what people want to live in as public housing. Now, there used to be little nippy organisations, you know, and we've had a wonderful few very small housing associations. We've done some seriously innovative stuff, but they're all being gobbled up by the big housing associations now, who become remoter and remoter. I mean, we had a job, I won't mention which one it is, but it's not very far from here, where, you know, we were dealing with quite a big block looking over the meadows. I can't think where it is, but anyway. And there was, I'm worried about this camera, but, you know, we had some wonderful views from the house, and we had these sort of corner windows so you could see the view. And this woman in the housing association, who was our client at the time, she luckily left, and she said, "Oh no, we can't have corner windows." I said, "Oh, why not? It's a fantastic view of the Pentland Hills and Edinburgh Castle, and it's wonderful. Clients would love it in their living room." "Oh no, we can't have that. Our clients can't afford the curtains." Now, don't you laugh, but she was deadly serious, you know. And I looked at her and I thought, well, if I was one of your tenants, I would say, well, stuff the curtains, I'd rather have the bloody view, you know. But she hadn't got to that stage, really. And, you know, but that's the problem. Trying to do architecture for people who aren't interested is very hard work. Anyway, we stuck with it, and we got our corner windows, by the way.
The comment from your client about curtains, that doesn't surprise me, because you need that almost every week, that level of almost deluded self-thought that they don't think of the end user.
The other problem is risk. I mean, we are so risk averse now. And we had I don't know if you know, but we did a long time ago, we did, I think, one of the most successful arts centres in Scotland at DCA in Dundee. And for us, it was our sort of rite of passage building. It was way back in the 90s. And it's still, I was there the other day, it hasn't changed very much, and it's fantastically successful. I mean, it's changed Dundee. Loads of people used it, from ladies who lunch to the beautiful people to kids. All sorts of people use it. The bar makes masses of money, which feeds into the art centre. You don't hear those words very often. And we had a sort of anniversary dinner about, 20 years or 15, 15 years, something after it. And they got a bunch of people together, including ourselves. And we all went around the table. And what was really interesting about that whole project, it was risk, 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 risk. The council took a huge political risk when they were sort of closing nursery schools to have a contemporary art centre. They chose a very risky site with a sort of rickety old warehouse on it. They had a very sort of dodgy business plan. You know, they really didn't know if it was going to work. You know, they took a risk that they might get the printmakers in, they might not. They took a risk on the architect. The biggest thing we built was the fruit market. You know, we're an office of 5 people. These days we wouldn't get even anywhere near the shortlist because we hadn't done 15 art centres. You know, the whole thing was a risk, getting the lottery money. It was risk, risk, risk. And it's now the most successful art centre. And where you avoid all risk, you achieve nothing.
On that note, thank you very much, Richard.